Good morning, everyone. I apologize for being a little bit late here. I've had to switch from my phone. I'm sorry, from my computer to my phone. For some reason, my headset's just not liking the dongle on my computer for some reason. So I'm going to have to figure that out later. Well, welcome to the Morning Mindset, everybody. I've talked a little bit about sales cycles in the past, and we even did a whole series on sales that you can find on YouTube. Well, that's a series. It was a week, right? We spent a week talking about sales. And I wanted to talk about pipeline development today because I think this is an important subject, right? We've kind of gotten into a lot of personal development stuff, and yesterday we spoke a little bit about, that personal development really should be in the arena of the things you're trying to accomplish, right? In your direct management of the things that you're doing. And so today I want to talk a little bit about pipeline development. A lot of you people here are salespeople, and even if you're a business owner, you're a salesperson. If you own a business, you're doing sales. And so I want to talk a little bit about outreach, pipeline development, and try to help you understand the valuation. And let me tell you why it's so important. I see salespeople and very well-spoken, capable salespeople quit early, or they don't start the right way and they're looking for proof. I'm going to send Beto a couple of leads, kind of see what happens with them, instead of just going at it and actually really, really developing. I got a couple people working with us right now. They get it, and they put discoveries on our calendar every day. In fact, one particular individual, we're having to meet as a company today just to go through and make sure we've got everything organized with everything they've sent in. They've sent in many, many different opportunities that are just huge. So in reality, what it comes down to is if you don't understand pipeline development, it's very difficult to be very good at sales, okay? And I can tell you why, because there's a lot of reasons why a salesperson is successful. Let's go over some basics. You know your product, right? If you know your product, you can speak about it. And not only knowing your product, but having it somewhat memorized and really understanding your product. Because if you're talking with someone and having to reference that product information while you're speaking with them, you're not going to have a good conversation, right? Because sales is all about having a good conversation with someone you're building a relationship with. So that's a basic, okay? And again, I'm not trying to get into all the basics. I'm just making clear a few things before we get into pipeline development. Another one is understanding the dialogue when you're speaking with an individual. You have to let them speak. Most of the time that you're speaking with them, you have to listen to the things that they're saying so that you can culture the pitch that you have around what it is that you hear them telling you. Okay, we've talked about that in different ways before. So those are just 2 points that are important. And what happens is a sales guy will read a book, he'll or she'll kind of get into the mode of understanding this, how to talk with people, how to negotiate, how to persuade them, how to understand your product. There's these rules, right, to being a good salesperson. Well, what's really not spoken about enough, and we're going to talk about it here, and even though I've got numbers in front of you guys to kind of take a look at, this is more coming from a emotional perspective. Where salespeople fail is in the emotions they allow into the environment when they're making sales. Person talked on the phone that you just got off the phone with was rude. Maybe the person you just got off the phone with was excited. Whatever it is, the biggest challenge to being a good salesperson is understanding how to stay neutral about how you're feeling about things. Not letting people's anger, not letting people's rejection, obviously, bother you. And also not getting caught up in being very successful with the things that you're doing. Okay, and how often have you had a really good call? Man, it was a great call. And it felt so good to make that call because the person was so interested that you didn't do anything else the rest of the day, right? You took off early, went and had dinner, right? Maybe a couple beers, whatever it was. You were just like, man, I did it. That guy's going to buy for sure. Well, that emotion that you're experiencing is just as dangerous to becoming successful as a salesperson as letting someone who's angry affect you. And so you have to play the numbers, okay? And it's a difficult thing because you'll hear a lot of sales trainers say it's not about the numbers, and the unfortunate thing in the personal development space is it's really popular to just talk against certain principles like, oh, you don't want to do it by the numbers. Or you'll see a lot of trainers saying, that doesn't work. You do it this way. Right? Like that's how they kind of catch you. Right? Here's the old tried and true, but that doesn't work in the new market. You got to do it the way I'm telling you to. So one thing that is never going to change, and I don't care if it's a galactic leap year ahead, doesn't matter when it is you've got to play it by the numbers. Okay, you've got to decide what number of contacts, what number of phone calls you're going to make. Okay, and that is your guideline, that is your rule. Whether you have successful calls, terrible calls, nobody closes today, nobody wants the information today, doesn't matter. You got to keep your number solid. My favorite number in sales is 30. Okay, now I've had guys sit down and say, man, I could make 100 calls in a day. And I, don't disagree with that. Well, how about 30 conversations? Okay, if any of you have ever had a really, really busy day in sales, meaning the person did answer the phone, you got to the decision maker, or at least gave your pitch, and you get through 30 of those kinds of conversations in a day, man, that's pretty good. Okay. So I like to base it on what would be considered somewhat successful. So maybe some days you need to make 40, 50 calls because nobody's answering the phone. Okay. But we're going to look at the number 30. Okay. So pipeline development and understanding the closing cycle. So if you make 30 calls a day, you can basically consider, as long as the other principles we were talking about, knowing your product, knowing how to negotiate, how to persuade, making sure you're listening, as long as you polished yourself as a salesperson on the other principles that are important, you should have at least one sale that day. Okay? That doesn't mean you're going to close anybody that day. That is not the point at all. And this is where people don't understand pipeline development very well. And this is why they give up. And that's why their emotions get control of them and they quit. Okay? So if you're doing 20 days a month at 30 calls a day, you basically have created and generated 20 sales. So I don't know how many of you are selling something that's worth at least, let's just say $1,000. Okay, on a close with some residuals, whatever it might be. Let's just use something really basic. Well, if it's $1,000 that you're going to make on that sale, and you just basically made 20 that month, which again doesn't matter when they're going to close. We're going to talk about that in a minute. You just generated 20 grand. Okay. Well, when you're playing this by the numbers, it's very difficult to see that you've had an opportunity to generate that much money, but it's not in your bank account. So there's this emotional impact that we have that says, man, what I'm doing isn't working. I better hurry up and find something else to do. This isn't going to work, right? You start polluting your personality, polluting your consciousness with these ideas that are inaccurate, okay? You got to understand pipeline development. You got to understand what it means to build a pipeline, okay? When you've been with a company for 4 or 5 years, a lot of times the guys that have been there that long, they close sales all the time. They don't seem to be working that hard, and it's always this mystery, right? It's because they've built themselves a pipeline. They've been closing, talking, moving things forward in time for such a long period of time that they've got all these compounding sales. So if you're looking at this, okay, on average, on let's just say a semi-technical sale, if you're doing JVs, or you're doing large system sales, you might want to add a couple weeks on almost each one of these, right? So about 5% of the people that you talk to are going to close within 2 weeks. Okay, that's a small percentage. Okay, it's a small percentage of people that are going to be like, man, I needed this product and we're ready to go. Okay, about 5% of them are going to close. So if you're talking about 20 people, right, in a given month, we're talking about maybe one you're going to close in a 2-week period. And you may not have even got to that person until the last day of that month. Okay? So you gotta kind of look at the variables in there. I'm not talking about if you make 30 calls a day, that's going to be that one person within that 5%. Okay? Within 2 months, about 30% of people close. And almost every sales guys I've talked to, this is pretty normal, right? About 30% of the people that you're calling will close within that 2-month period. Now, that's usually the sales that we consider to be the most fruitful. Those are the ones that we've catered, we've spent 5 or 6 phone calls on, and they're moving through the sales cycle and actually have a high interest, and they get towards the close and they close the deal. Okay, so you could consider this as well. This is something to think about. Okay, the average number of hours you're going to spend on the phone, whether you're opening opportunities and spending time at the discovery desk or possibly closing the sale yourself, you spend about 5 hours on average on a sale of this size with the individual people on the phone. Okay, so if you're looking at it from that perspective, right, 5 into 1,000, what are you looking at? It's 200, right? So you're basically generating a sales making $200 an hour, right? If you really think about it, you got to think about these things a little bit differently than you have before. Okay, it's really important that you look at the numbers and keep the numbers in your mind. So if 5% is only going to close within 2 weeks, within 2 months you're going to get that 30%. Well, from the time you called all the way to 2 months out, it's going to be different from today to tomorrow. So today's going to have 2 months out. Tomorrow's going to have 2 months in a day. The next day is going to have 2 months and 3 days. So you got to think about how it compounds over time. But about 30% of the people, as long as you're following the rules of doing sales the way you should, will close within that first 2 months. Okay, within 6 months is where you're going to find about 50% of your sales. Okay, why do sales cycles take so long? I have been doing this for 18 years. I don't know. Usually when I need something, I'm pretty avid to buy it. Like I could tell you, I just got into an email service, started looking into email services because I needed it for some of the things we're doing here. I've been a patron of email services. In fact, at one time I had a company called Inbox Pubs. We did email for one of the businesses that I had. And it took me 2 months. That was a 2-month cycle for me, right? I signed the document yesterday. Okay, started looking into it about 2 months ago. So on average, that seems a little bit more viable for someone who's actually looking for a product. It took me about 2 months. So that's the category I'm in, right? But for some reason, the biggest category is within that 6-month period. Okay, for whatever reason, it just usually takes about that long to close up about 50% of your deals. So if you're on the phone and you're moving things forward and you hear things like, oh, we're going to be going out to a convention, it's not good for us this month because of X. If they're still talking to you and they're still talking about the viability of your product, don't get into a position where you start to become disbelievers. Oh, man, these guys are never going to buy. I'm not going to call them back. Okay, if you don't follow this cycle specifically and understand, well, maybe this is one of my 6-month guys, no big deal. I'm going to keep in touch with them. Okay, most important thing is if you say you're going to do a follow-up call on X day at X time, you do it. Bray, good friend of mine. He wasn't a better salesman than I was. Okay, but he was absolutely just on time every time. Made that phone call right when he should, right when the date came up. Always texted the individual ahead of time to let him know, hey, tomorrow's the day we're talking. Okay, and he did as many sales, if not more than me, because he didn't let it blind him that, oh man, this is taking 4 months, and these guys aren't going to buy. Why am I even calling them? I'm going to call fresh people. I'm going to have a good day calling fresh people. So a lot of times you can miss the margins on that 6-month period, and you can kill your own sales cycle and end up not getting those sales in because you personally didn't take the time to stay positive or stay active about the fact that, hey, man, this maybe just one of my 6-month cycle people, no big deal. Okay, 50% of my people are going to be in this cycle. And keep in that solid mindset. That's how it works. That's what you're going to be seeing. Okay, so about 50% take about 6 months. Okay, that is not unusual. Okay, and then within 2 years, it drops way back down. Okay, there is a certain point where it's pretty evident that they're just playing. Okay, they just like talking to you. They like the idea of it. Okay, and they're just not ready at all. But I do want you to understand that is a very small percentage. It's just a really small percentage. Okay, so when you see people that are moving forward that are still interested, remember that about 50% of them are going to take about 6 months to close, and you need to stay diligent on following up with them. They just happen to be in that little bit longer sales cycle. Like I said, for me, I'm a 2-month guy. I'm certainly not a 2-week guy. Okay, me and Kyle Stozik, we had a 2-week close on a fairly large JV. It was pretty awesome. Another JV that was brought in by another one of our people, I still think we're going to get him. That's gone 2.5 months. I think they're a 6-month cycle company. Okay, so just realize that that's where these people are. So what's important is this: is you make your 30 calls. Make them. Okay, every day. You got to play it by the numbers, and you have to stay subservient to getting back to people and getting back to them on time. Okay. I had one individual, was actually the CEO of my automotive company. I have 1,700 dealerships that we do services for in Auto Search Technologies. Company started about 11 years ago. And I remember one particular day, this guy closed 7 deals in the same day. Just blew out our commission model that we had, right? We had all kinds of bonuses and all kinds of stuff based off of things that were almost impossible to do. And he pulled them all off. And the reason is he'd been in sales at that point for about 14 months. And his cycles were just compounding. His 2-week guys, his 2-month guys, his 6-month guys, his 2-year guys, everyone just suddenly, because he kept making his calls every day, and he did every day, made calls. He made 30, 40 calls a day, every day. Everything just compounded. He literally closed 7 contracts in one day. Craziest thing I've ever seen in direct services sales like what we were doing. And the reason is because his sales were compounding. His 2-week guys, his 2-month guys, his 6-month guys, his 2-year, they all started showing up because he'd been selling for so long that his pipeline started to culture. And that's what ends up happening if you stick it out. Okay? Building it from the beginning is the hardest time because it feels like a ghost town. It feels like nothing's happening. Right? When we're talking these small percentages of people that close early, that's difficult because it just feels like you're doing way too much work because you're already dealing with one thing already before you're even looking at the pipeline statistics, okay? The first thing you're dealing with is this first piece here that says 30 calls a day equals 1 sale. Well, what does that mean for 29 calls? Right? That means 29 calls we're not going to go anywhere. Even if you set 7 discoveries out of those 30 calls. Okay, so it's not just about setting a call up. It's about maybe out of the 30 people, there were 7 to 10 people willing to talk about it, but they aren't going to buy. Okay, so there's a lot of variance in what I'm saying here. It's not just like someone says, nope, not interested, and hangs up the phone. Okay, that 1 in 30 could be the one that's going to buy, and 8 or 9 other people that actually went a little bit into the cycle. Ended up on the phone, got the information, reviewed it, talked about what might work for their company, come back and tell you no. Okay, so there's a lot more valuation there, a lot more emotional impact on that 30 calls, besides just 29 people telling you no. There's people that got into the cycle that walked away. Okay, but if you keep it in the numbers, 30 calls, 1 sale. Okay, keep it in your mind. 30 calls, 1 sale. Now, what's difficult about that is I'm talking about 30 new calls. Okay, so you'll have days where you're doing lots of callbacks. Okay, don't forget to get into the new calls every day. Okay, when I was really, really busy and I was doing all the central sales for Apogee, I made myself call 15 new people a day. Now, I had variant numbers of responsibilities. I was the CEO. I was a creative director. I was in charge of all the designers. And we were growing very fast. We had over 30 employees. And so I had a lot of responsibilities. And, of course, I was following up and closing on all the deals. So it was very important for me to say, okay, stop. I got to do 15 new calls. That was a Steven Skiffman thing. If you guys ever want to get into a real just earthy traditional sales trainer, Steven Skiffman's cold calling techniques, buy that book. I still kind of live by a couple things that he had to say. He's an 80s and 90s sales trainer. Really like him a lot. So anyways, my point is you got to make these new calls. If you make 30 a day, you're going to have a sale in there. Okay, you will for sure. If you do it 20 days out of the month, you got 20 sales. If that sale's worth $1,000 to you, that's 20 grand. Okay, you can make more money in sales than you can as a doctor, a lawyer. The only other way you can really make as much money as a salesperson is owning and operating the businesses yourself. Okay, this is the best type of career, in my opinion, for someone who's good at communications. You just got to keep scaling up what you're selling, right? We're talking about a $1,000 product right now. If you're doing JVs, these cycles would double, probably, most likely, as far as the closing cycles are concerned. But the worth of a close is, 30, 50,000. Okay, now you're talking about being a high 6-figure, potentially 7-figure earner. Okay, you can make money in sales, but not very many people can build a pipeline. Okay, I don't know why that's so difficult. For me, I've been very good at it. Okay, a lot of people I know have been very good at it, but it's somehow that's like salespeople feel like they were been thrown into the gears and grinded up, and it doesn't work. I can't do it. I don't believe in it. I've called all these people. Nobody wants to buy from me. All these things you keep telling yourself, and you're not basing it on the numbers. Okay, 30 calls a day is one sale. 20 sales days in a month, you're going to make 20 sales. Within 2 weeks, 5% will close. Within 2 months, 30%. Within 6 months, 50%. Within 2 years, 5%. And then there will be about 10% that are lost in the closing cycle. Okay, and that's usually from things that don't have to do with your sales platform, but maybe they didn't get along with the onboarder. Maybe they paid the money in, and for whatever reason, they just end up having a bad experience, or they're running out of money, whatever it might be. You always got to put that 10% churn in there, because it could be nobody's fault that the sale didn't officially happen, although it got all the way through to the end, and things just break down. Okay. I haven't had a company that I've operated that hasn't had that happen. Okay. I've even had one gentleman, his wife got very upset that he spent the money, and he came up with like 50 just BS reasons why he had to charge back on us. It was a mess. We went back and forth with him for a minute, but you know what I did? I just let the money go, because really the reality is 10% of people are making a mistake buying from you. It has nothing to do with you or your business, right? They just made a bad decision. So there's about 10% is going to get lost in the cycles, just how it works. So when you're looking at this, man, now just get your mind on it. The numbers, got to do the numbers, 30 calls today, 30 calls tomorrow, 30 calls the next day. At the end of the month, maybe you're only sitting on top of one sale at the end of your first month. Okay, maybe that one sale isn't even officially closed yet. But what you've got to look at is, I started my pipe, I followed the numbers, I did the things I should do. I understood my product, I explained my product well. I've read a couple of really good books from some salespeople. And again, if you want any suggestions on books, I'm not a huge fan of everything he does, but Grant Cardone's books on sales are some of the best. Okay, if you just want some real, just ironclad advice on how to operate as a salesperson, I suggest his stuff. But my point is, make sure you're not the problem, okay, in the situation. Okay, and there's three things that matter to that. You got to understand how to sell, so be educated. You've got to be good at dialogue, and the third most important thing is you got to understand pipeline development. If you don't understand pipeline development, you are just up for a world of frustration, because there's nothing that's gonna save you in this environment. Absolutely nothing. Okay, because talking to a very successful salesperson sometimes could just be frustrating. Well, great that you're making it happen. It's very personal, right? You have to really kind of like write this in the code of your brain a little bit, that if I make 30 calls, there's a sale. If I make 30 calls 20 days out of the month, I've got 20 sales. And I just need to keep moving forward through time, because I've got 2 week, 2 month, 6 month, 2 year cycles that I'm dealing with. Okay, get that in your brain and get on the phones and start crushing it. Okay, the biggest difference between you being successful and not being successful is routine. Period. End of story. Okay, if there's proof that the products that you're selling work and work well for the people that you're selling it for, that obviously is product knowledge, right? You need to understand that what you have is worth buying. What you have is measured out in the industry to where it's affordable in its district, whatever it might be. So you got to make sure those things are there. But once it's there, you've got to not blame anything but your own personal inability to stick to a routine if you're not making enough sales. Okay, and don't write people off. If they're pushed down your sales cycle a few months down the road, stay excited about those people. They just might be a longer cycle sale. That's just how it goes. Don't let that become an emotional problem for you, and you will be very successful with sales. All right, everyone, let's have an incredible rest of our week. It's a good sales day today. Really, the best days are Wednesday, Thursday. Tuesday's a good day too. So if you're burning phones, let's make 30 calls today. I will be back here again tomorrow morning.